Hello and welcome to the In the Money Players podcast. This is our show for Tuesday, November 18th. Peter Thomas Fornatale back with you in the Brooklyn bunker once again, joined by my friend Nick Tammaro. Nick, how are things?
Going great. Rocking along. End of the year looms and a lot of fun stuff coming up.
For sure. I mean, there's no off season, as we often say, but there is a little bit of a lull that's about to be over with, which is why we broke format last week and talked about speed figures. And I asked people to comment, and they did. We got loads of responses, and people really seem to like this more evergreen approach. So we're going to keep it rocking and rolling here. Did want to put in a quick word at the beginning of the show here for our friends over at the University of Arizona Racetrack Program and their Global Symposium on Racing. That's happening December 8th through 10th. Lots of interesting panels. More than anything else, if you're interested in racing and thinking about doing racing as something more than just being a fan, best networking event I think you could find. I mean, talk about one-stop shopping. You can't help but meet interesting people. We've met people out there who've ended up working for In the Money. So definitely encourage people to check it out. If you go to the University of Arizona website, I'm not going to read the URL, but boy, it's easy to find. If you just put in Global Symposium on Racing, you'll have no problem finding it. Looks like there's still a coupon on the site. I thought it was done yesterday, but there's still a coupon on the site for discounted tickets as well. But read the fine print on that one. Anyway, the Global Symposium on Racing happening in Tucson, Arizona, December 8th through 10th. I know you've gone in the past, Nick. Schedules are going to get in the way for both of us this year, but I have a feeling you're going to endorse the idea, somebody interested in getting involved in working in racing, that it's a place you want to be.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, look, we've benefited from going on the taco tour and finding Eric DeCoster, who walked up to us as we stuffed Sonoran dogs into our faces at, I think, the third stop. So, no, it's a great experience if you're exactly like you said, if you're looking to maybe develop the ability to get involved in the racing world, and pretty much representatives from every major entity, a bunch of organizations that work within racing like International Sound and RTN are there as well. The panels look really interesting. There's one that I think will be tremendously rewarding to just sit and listen to, which is the one with the jockeys. I think they've combined for 40,000 wins, and Ramon Dominguez
is 40,000. I'm told that's
just 40,000, right? So pretty amazing there, and that'll be a lot of fun. So they do a great job with it, and obviously there's many worse places to be for a few days than Tucson in December.
It's true. If it wasn't for all the school and family and life obligations, I wouldn't miss it. Unfortunately, it's one of these things that maybe I'll try to get it back on the dance card next year, because it really is. It's great fun, and you can't help but learn something and meet interesting people, the kind of things we are all about. Global Symposium on Racing. Google that URL will come up, and I'll do you a favor. I'll pop it in the description and the notes too, so you can click a link if you want to go that way. But yeah, lots of great feedback we got on the speed figure application. So we had some follow-up questions that I wanted to get to. I thought the interesting way to do it was, last week we talked about sort of definitionally what they are, what are the different types. Today I want to talk about how we use them. And for me, I thought the first thing, we mentioned it quickly last week, but I wanted to start with the idea of speed figure pars. A par figure being the average figure for a certain class. Now, DRF will have this for many races, not all. They don't overly specialize, but maiden special weight at Saratoga for fillies and for colts, you'll see that number in there at the top. Lots of other numbers will be in there. When you don't have numbers, you can kind of figure it out / guesstimate by making certain adjustments for yourself, and it can be tricky. We'll use the example I just brought up, maiden at Saratoga. Let's say it's a maiden state bred. I don't believe they will publish a figure for that, but you can kind of just know, on average, the fastest ones are obviously going to be just as fast, but on average, they're going to be a few points slower. Let me ask you this. We didn't talk about this off air. Am I on an island with using speed figure pars as a place to start with handicapping analysis, Nick, or is that something that you look at as well?
Yeah, I look periodically. I mean, I can tell you from my experience working for the Bayer team, the way the pars work there. And so the pars are adjusted basically after every meet. And if you're talking about a jurisdiction where racing goes on year round, they're just done periodically throughout the year. And so those pars are adjusted based on the performance of the horses at that given meet. And there basically is a report that comes out that has the average figure for that class level and the par. And if you see a stark contrast with, there's also a sample number there with a decent sample size, and there will be an adjustment made at that point. I think what we're sort of getting at in a way, Pete, is that one of the things that you want to kind of do as a handicapper, and this is easier said than done, but you want to use the pars to almost create a race rating, if you will.
Yeah.
And, one of the things that I find difficult, and I look at races constantly, but, if I'm ever going to dip my toes in, let's say there's a carryover at Horseshoe Indianapolis, and I'm going to look at those races, the one thing where I feel like I'm missing something relative to someone who might follow that circuit a little bit more regularly is, well, I don't know if that 7,500 2 life might have been stronger than that $7,500 3 life. And it is possible that those happen, right? You can get a lot of those. You could get 2 lives that are weaker than some maiden claimers. And I think that what you're trying to do is use the par to, first of all, get a snapshot of it before you then maybe go into a tool like Formulator and dig in and see how horses ran back and things like that. So I don't want to get too tangential with it, but I think one of the things I've experienced in making morning lines and handicapping, and I don't want to get into the nitty gritty necessarily of the CAWs, but one of the things that their algorithms are very, very good at is assessing races. Mm-hmm. So they seem to know which races were good and which races were bad. And if you're a sports bettor, it's like those are the sharps, right? When the line doesn't look right, it's because they're trying to tell you something. And so what they're very, very good at, and they had an incredible line on the Kentucky Downs Forum, and I experienced that throughout Keeneland. They knew which Kentucky Downs horses were going to run, and they knew which ones weren't. And I think that's what you're trying to do when you develop a system that might be rooted in a par, and then you put a little nuance to it to try and figure out, and you say, oh, there's a great example. There's a horse running back this weekend at Gulfstream on Saturday named Local Knowledge, who's running in a stake race. He comes out of a lightning fast race at Keeneland. He got I believe a 96 buyer on debut. He got a really, really high figure, and he's running in a stake race right back. That race has come up very, very poor in terms of subsequent performance. So
the figure was fast. When you say fast, the figure was fast, but then the subsequent performances are telling a different story.
Correct. And so it's on topic as far as where we are right now, just as to say, you would have flagged that as a race that, number one, was way faster than par, right? I don't know off the top of my head what the buyer par is for a maiden at Keeneland, 3-year-old and up, or 2-year-old rather. I would guess it's probably somewhere in the low 80s, and he got a 94. Well, you start to pick through some of those subsequent performances, and there are actually some good ones. So I hadn't dug into this race too much. There are some decent ones, but for the most part, the horses that ran back have gone down figure-wise. Right. And what you would want to know is, as you flag that as a race that was above par, the fig's probably a little too high.
Right. And that's a great use that I didn't even have on my list of things to talk about today, but using that Formulator charts feature to see what horses run subsequently and just getting a sense of, is that figure the best assessment of the ability of these horses? I'm not going to say it's a wrong figure necessarily, but is it going to help us going forward? That's a key question. And generally with pars, the bullet points I had, an easy way to see which horse is fit for any race. And, you'll hear me say all the time on different shows, such and such a horse looks just too slow. What do I mean by that? Well, probably what I mean when they're too slow is that they've never run the par for a certain race. One of the key things I use speed figure pars for is very specifically in maiden races. This is a way, if it's a field at Saratoga with a few horses that have run and a few first-time starters, if none of the ones that have run the par or particularly close to it, I'm going to spend more time. I'm going to allocate more of my time diving into those pedigrees on the first-time starters, because history is telling me that one of them is likely to be able to run that par and get the job done in that spot. And then the other thing I like speed figure pars for is I think they're a good. They can tell you what ponds you want to fish in for long shots. So this could be really useful in two specific ways for me. If you're talking about a mythical contest where you need long shots, you're looking at a race where no horses run the par, I'm going to highlight that race. If I have an optional play or something, that's somewhere that I want to look, because when none of them have run the pars, and this is a line I think from Brad Free's classic handicapping book, Handicapping 101, if none of them have run the par, that's maybe an indicator that speed figures aren't the best way to find the winner for this particular race. So I'm going to look more at trainer angles, looking for big jump ups. I'm always looking for pace angles, but I'm going to look even more for pace angles, just because if none of them have run the par, this is an opportunity to look for prices. And I think, Nick, this is why 4 weeks out from the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies this year, we were talking on these airwaves about this is a race where we want to find a long shot. Now, in the end, 8-1, not the longest of shots, but hey, still, it points you in the right direction. That maybe the favorites can't be trusted if they can't run the par. Those are my thoughts on applications of speed figure pars. Do you have anything to add to or piggyback on to any of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes sense when alluding to the juvenile fillies, as you did. When you're talking about horses that are basically all running the same figures, you shouldn't take a short price.
Right.
You should be looking for value wherever you can have it. And we talked about it in advance. And whether we ended up on the right horse, I used Super Corridor, didn't have the right horses around her, and that was my problem as far as the races, subsequent races. But yeah, that's really the key time for it.
Yeah, 86 I think is the figure par for that race, and I mean there were horses that the favorites had maybe 84, 85, but they weren't. There was nothing standoutish that made me want to go toward the lower end of the market there. I had a specific question. I mentioned in passing the idea of the weekly race review. Now, different people have different ways of doing this, and honestly, the best notes I've ever made are probably ones where I can do a little bit more in real time, but that's not always realistic. And I do think there's something valuable about waiting till the end of the week when you've got sources like Timeform US and like DRF that have chart features where you can go back in and see the figures earned in the different races, and then taking that time for, if you're following one circuit, you look at every race, or if you're just looking at racing nationally, maybe you're just looking at the stakes races. And very simple math. I mean, basically you take 20 off the Timeform US figure, that puts it close enough to on the buyer scale where I feel like you can compare apples to apples. And it's a great opportunity to make a race note and say something like, if the figures agree, I'm probably not going to make a note at all. I'm probably just going to accept that figure. But if the figures are wildly different, I'm going to make some sort of race note and just say, hey, Timeform had this higher, Timeform had this slower. And that's a race, to Nick's point earlier about coming and watching the runbacks. That's a race I'm going to be looking at all the runbacks in. And it's just an opportunity then, it goes beyond speed figures. That's a great point to go back, watch races, sharpen up trip notes you made in time. And it's also at that point, you're going to have more pace information. You're going to have the Timeform US pace lines. You're going to have information if you're a racingflow.com person, and you can go right ahead and put in your notes at that point, horses who were, you're going to note fast races, you're going to note slow races, you're going to note races where there's a different disagreement, and then you can start getting in, and we'll do a whole other video on, horses that were maybe aided or hurt by dynamics. And it's obviously just an opportunity to make any other kind of trip notes you have. How do you do race review? Do you have a process, anything like what I'm describing, or are you doing everything in real time?
Yeah, I mean, I usually go back and watch replays for a given circuit after the week, and I'll make notes on individual races and see if there were situations where you wanted to upgrade certain horses, you wanted to upgrade certain types of horses based on maybe a path bias or a profile or something like that. So yeah, I'll go and do that, plop some notes into Formulator more than likely. I still have a notebook actually where I write down some of it and try and merge those two. But it gets a little tricky at times to keep up with all of it. I utilize a lot of the tools that are out there as well. I mean, if you're following New York racing and you want to see if there was a given defined track profile on a day, go to the NYRA Track Trends page. I mean, it's invaluable in terms of getting, it's Andy's assessment of the surface. And the good thing about it is that he is not somebody that's chasing down biases.
Right.
So he's going to put something on there that's objective and he has no agenda with it. So if he's putting it on there that it looked like a certain running style or a certain path was an advantage, then you can rest assured that came through a lot of study, that came through watching head-ons and pans and really getting a full assessment of it.
That's a great idea to just, if you're not doing that work yourself, and even if you are doing that work yourself, to look at the track trends on NYRA. Andy Serling really puts a lot of work into that. And I'd be happy having cutting and pasting that into my notes in a product like Formulator. Other than notes, which Timeform has notes, Formulator has notes. I typically use the Formulator notes, but there's also the idea, and at some point I got away from it just because my email box got so crowded with it, but horses to watch. DRF has a horse to watch feature. At theraces.com, where I do a lot of work in writing, have a horse tracker. When you're going through and you're doing this work that we're describing, and you have a horse that you are really inclined to bet back or bet against, that's a terrific way of doing it. And let's say you could piggyback off Andy's work with this too. Let's say he had a day with a pronounced bias one way or another. You can go through, make your own assessment of which horses were helped, which horses were hurt. That's the kind of thing you could, certainly make a trip note about, and possibly even if it's at something you really want to be paying attention to, make sure you add that horse to your tracker or your horse to watch list. You mentioned about making physical writing, doing physical writing. So this next topic I wanted to get to is one that I don't do like I used to, because it was something I would do physically on a piece of paper. And a few years ago, I just decided enough was enough. Handicapping too many races a week. I'm full digital. I handicap with 4 tabs open now, and I could theoretically still have a scratch sheet or a spreadsheet that I dump numbers into to create these ability figures that I'm about to talk about, but I honestly just don't do it as much as I should. But when I was thinking about applications of speed figures, one of the things that leapt to mind is this concept that came to me through Mike Maloney. By the way, didn't exactly set up to make a big plug here, but I will. I did just find another box of copies of Betting with an Edge, Mike's tremendous must-read handicapping book. If you're interested in purchasing a copy of it, reach out to me. If you go to inthemoneypodcast.com, the contact button comes right to my email. But anyway, ability figures. This is a way, we talked about how looking at pars can give a race rating. Timeform US, I meant to mention back then when we were talking about that, also has their own race rating system that is very, very useful. It's not a par exactly, but definitely something to pay attention to when looking at that. But ability figures are more like a horse rating. And it's not as simple. You might start by looking at the last speed figure, but it's not as simple as just looking at the last speed figure and going on with life. You're going to make adjustments based on, was that race a sprint and is today a route race? Basically, it's an idea to very quickly, and Mike could describe this better than me. Maybe we'll have him on as a special holiday gift to listeners and viewers and talk about this. Let us know. That my question for the audience this week, let us know in the comments here or by reaching out to me personally what topic you might like Mike to chat about. But ability figures, he can speak much more articulately than me. But I just love the idea of being able to look down at a field of horses and essentially have a power rating based on what the horse's body of work is and what they're doing today. Really useful way to break horses into different categories. And when I categories, prime contender, peripheral contender, / just a horse / eliminations. The idea of ability figures really helps to do that. And that can really come into play when you're talking about your exotic wagering and figuring out who you might want to use, whether you're talking verticals or horizontals. It's when I was working with Mike and doing this regularly, I found it very, very helpful. And honestly, it's something, if I make a New Year's resolution, maybe something I want to get back to doing even more. Have you ever, what do you think of this concept, Nick? Have you ever used anything like that?
Not with any kind of like structure. There have inevitably been plenty of times I've come across a horse that might have run frequently at a given circuit, and I thought maybe there was a little bit more to him than we had seen. It's happened all the time, constantly. And I think what you're trying to do there in a way is you're trying to project something that might be more extreme one way or the other than the public will see it. So, for example, do you see a horse that is frequently getting overbet, maybe is running particularly well, but is doing so with the advantage of maybe some favorable pace dynamics, some racetrack profiles, things like that, and that horse's ability does not equal what they're going to subsequently face? And so you're kind of taking the contra stance on that. And by the same token, on the other side of it, you can find horses that you think, boy, there's really more there. There really might be something that gets him an opportunity against a better field, or, can jump in class and be successful and maybe create some value with it. There was a horse that ran a couple times I liked him when he ran during the Belmont at Saratoga meet, named Mozambique. And he was trained by Linda Rice at the time. Linda ran him in an off-the-turf race early in the Saratoga meet, gave up on him that day. He got claimed by Rudy. Rudy brought him back on Travers Day, and he ran a really good fourth, missing in a photo for third in the New York Red Race that Long Pour won. Long Pour got, I want to say, an 84 buyer speed figure in there. Really good for a New York Red Maiden race. And I thought to myself, Mozambique was a horse that had trained well for Linda. Looking at the workout reports, I had made a note on it. And I thought to myself, there's got to be something more to this horse. He ran hard in the race on Travers Day. And sure enough, he came back about 2 weeks into the Belmont at the Big A meet, and he won at 9-1. And then he came right back and he ran second in his first start against Winners at an even bigger price. So this was a horse that, ability-wise, I didn't really put anything numerical on it, but I knew based on having watched his replays from last year, getting ready to bet him Belmont weekend, getting away from it because of the wet track and whatnot and all that went on Friday of Belmont week, but, kind of keeping up with him, that there still might be something more there. And that's one where you can definitely zig where the public might zag on a horse like that, because really you're just betting based on your feeling. I mean, you're not betting on anything that's quantifiable.
Right. Sean Borman is somebody else who I know has used this concept, and I think he adapted better to me to the tablet. I think he still physically writes numbers down. You know what? I'm going to put this on the list of things to talk to him about, because we're going to do another pro player diary this week. I think it's Thursday. We're going to catch up with what Sean's been up to betting wise the last couple of weeks. And we talked about it the last time I had him on about actually handicapping a race. So maybe we'll even use ability figures and get his senses of that. So look for that. If you're a YouTube person, you're going to need to, that's going to be audio only. So make sure you subscribe to the In the Money Players podcast feed wherever you get your pods. It's great. Also, in addition to having contributions from Sean, you can now get the Gallop Out in audio on there as well. You can also subscribe to their video feed on their own. Their videos are still going to be Gallop Out branded. So if you're In the Money subscribed on YouTube, which we encourage you to do, you'll have to take an extra leap to make sure you get the stuff that those boys are up to as well. But yeah, ability figures, a very interesting concept. We'll have more on that. And then I wanted to get a little bit more, and I had a question I think it came from when we were talking about the sheets, and this typically is the realm of the sheets, but you can use some more basic techniques to make the same kind of assessments using any kind of speed figure. And that's the idea of using speed figures to assess a horse's condition. And we'll start with the definition. What is condition? You're not handicapping the field, you're handicapping the horse basically to determine, do you expect them to run the same figure today? Do you expect them to run slower? Do you expect them to run faster than what is based on the paper? And that's another exercise I've done at times related to the ability figure idea, is just try to write down on a page, what's that horse going to run today? Now, the sheets players they're the masters of this. And I'll admit, when you look at the graph, some of these insights they come very intuitively when you see the way races are spaced out. There's a lot of orthodoxy around this in the sheets world, some of which I think there's a lot to, others of which I think it can be sometimes read too mechanically, because, they're looking for, often you'll hear a sheets player talk about the pattern a horse is on. And, the classic one is the old O2X pattern, which is basically if a horse has run two top races in a row. Tell me if I got this right, Nick, but I think it's two tops in a row or paired tops. They can often actually be expected to go backwards in that third start. And if the races are compressed, I probably think there's a lot to that. And if they're spread out, I don't think there's much to it. Anyway, that's not why I bring this up. I did want to mention, though, that they're just miles ahead of anything you're going to get from me if you go to a forum on Ragozin or Thorograph, or check out the Len Ragozin book, The Odds Must Be Crazy. If you're interested in looking for those kind of patterns, there's so much info there. For me, I keep it so much simpler. When looking at condition, I'm looking at just things like second time off the layoff, third race of the form cycle, the kind of stuff you hear me talk about all the time. I'm expecting horses to be able to improve. We're in a world now where, with all the workout information we have, you can see patterns in there that are going to affect how I view a horse's speed figure. If they've run a good race and then the works have improved, I'm not looking for I'm not really a bounce guy generally. But that's going to give me confidence to bet that horse they'll definitely improve. You look at sheets more than I do, Nick. And part of that, I think, is just how much of an influence they have on the market and doing the morning line work that you do. But I'm curious, how we talked about the sheets a little bit last week, but I didn't really talk to you about how you use them in terms of, are these patterns things you believe in and are looking for, and how do you generally use speed figures to assess a horse's condition?
Yeah, I think the sheets and thoroughgraphs more specifically, as we talk, the sheets, some people might say pertain to ragazines, but obviously most of us refer to both as sheets. Uh, they do a good job for me, especially my preferences on dirt. I'll look at turf as well. They do a good job of maybe taking your perspective to certain horses in what would otherwise be an evenly matched race.
Yeah.
So if you're looking for horses that might be going the right direction, that might be on the upswing, ones that might be on the downswing as well, it'll be identified there as well. I don't think their methodology provides you any kind of overwhelming, unique insight. I think it's probably a lot of the same stuff you can get in some of the other numerical speed figures. But I will say as well, there are notes in there. You mentioned this last week. There are notes in there for troubled trips or things like that might have been might have affected the performance all in all, which obviously you're not going to get in a buyer speed figure, and you're still going to have to do some video work yourself in order to be sure of that. So that's kind of the way I found them to be most useful. I think the classic case for a Thorograph user is you find a newly turned 3-year-old, a newly turned 4-year-old running in a race against the same age group where they have figures that are just about as fast as what the horses in there are running. Those horses are pretty much auto bets.
Yeah, that's a great point.
They're about to take a step forward, which most horses do year to year. And if they're within hailing distance of where these other horses were when they were younger, then they're almost certainly going to just explode past them in terms of numerical performance. So like with any other speed figure, I mean, you need to find your comfort zone. I kind of went about it slowly over time and waited to sort of see what made me most comfortable in terms of how to use them. I would joke with people, especially when Jonathan and I were on our tour around America in 2015, that the win place contest players loved the sheets because everybody had the same numbers.
Wow.
And so it was like, well, that horse looked good on the thoroughgraphs. Like everybody looks good on the thoroughgraphs, right? I mean, if you're talking about a bad claiming race, then they're all running 15s and 16s. It's like, well, he ran a 16 last year. Yeah, he did. He got 222s recently. But, those are the kind of things you can manipulate speed figures from your own vantage point to do pretty much whatever you want. Right. It's about understanding the horse. And I still think the most important thing, and this is coming from somebody who made speed figures, who uses speed figures, if you don't have a full and clear understanding of how the race was run, then it's useless for you to dive into speed figures. If you don't know that it was a massive pace meltdown and the horses that came from way off of it look like gold, and then you go back and look through and you're like, nah, I want the horse that stuck around the longest. Yeah. You want to take the contrarian approach to it. And that really is what it boils down to. And Paul Matisse has said this on these airwaves for a long time. And he and I had a long conversation about it when we recapped the Breeders' Cup a few years ago, that the one thing that is still art more so than science is really having the ability to watch a race and assess how it was run. Yep. Really understand, some of the nuances of who moved at certain points. Did that trouble really matter? You alluded to using horse to watch lists and things like that. The horses you want to put on your horse to watch lists are the ones that nobody's putting on. You don't want to put on the ones that everybody else is putting on.
Yeah.
Right. Then you're just John Q. Public, and you're not getting any advantage by putting those horses down. So that's a little off topic as far as speed figures go. But with the sheets, with the thoroughgraphs, it's a matter of really applying it to whatever other speed figures you use and seeing where the appreciable differences are. We probably look more actively, guys like you and I, at some of the differences that we'll see between Timeform US and Beyer. But there are times where you'll see a horse that's really fast on the thoroughgraphs, or you'll see a horse that's a little ordinary on the thoroughgraphs, and he might be getting a really, really tremendous amount of support. Couple of examples of this in the Breeders' Cup, and you looked at those numbers and were like, Seismic Beauty was probably the biggest one. Seismic Beauty is a horse that's probably never going to have overwhelming thoroughgraph numbers, being a speed horse, being on the inside for the most part. But you looked at that race and you thought to yourself, okay, she's no better than like 5 or 6 of these horses, and becomes a horse that you immediately want to try and take on.
These are great points. I'm glad you mentioned about the newly turned angle. I remember reading about that for the first time in a book that's worth seeking out if you can find it. I think it was called Expert Handicapping by the great Dave Litfin.
Dave, God rest his soul, went into detail on this quite a bit. And that was actually when it kind of the my Rich Perloff on TVG used to call it the My How You've Grown angle.
Love that.
And it was a Dave went into detail on it. Dave also had a great. I got to find the book. I've got it at home, but he had a great statistic on the percentage of horses that go down in Beyer speed figure that debut with over a 70. And it was a huge number. And it really was eye-opening when I read it. And it was probably, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago that I read it. And I thought to myself, wow, that's really interesting. I never thought about that. But he had some great stats on it. So, yeah, if you can find an old copy of it, then definitely take a look at it. Because Dave, what he did in that book that was great, like most of the handicapping books, is he put in PPs of horses he was talking about.
Yes.
And he really gave it a lot of detail, gave it a lot of color.
We could do that on a future show here, which could be kind of
sure.
fun. Yeah, we could show some PPs.
I can already see your wheels spinning to have us do this next week.
Yeah, well, and you might have already hit on the next topic of that idea of what figures reasons you don't want to trust figures. That might be that could be segment 3 potentially. I do just want to add one more thing on this show, which is, and it's very similar to the My How You've Grown idea, but I did want to give credit. You mentioned Paul Matisse. I've also talked to Duke extensively about this idea that I just call figure improvement for age, FIFA, I guess we could call it, where it's not just the newly turned. It's anytime a horse has been on the shelf, if they come back, and months have passed in their 2, 3, or even 4-year-old year, depending on what the specifics of this horse are, you can maybe bake in some more improvement. And that's a way, one of the things, and we will talk about this in the next one of these that we do, when you can find reasons why the theoretically slower horse is going to run faster than the theoretically faster ones, that's where you find prices. And that's what it's all about. We'll pick up there, Nick, the next time we do this. We're going to have some recapping to do again soon as well. End of year awards, lots of good stuff coming up. Any final thoughts from you before I let you get out of here for this segment of the show?
No, fun topic. Glad to have done a little bit more on it. And I think there's still more to go. So we're gradually getting to everything.
Good stuff. Always good having Nick. If you are on the audio side, we've got Kim Weir coming up next to talk about the Nancy Kelly Volunteer Award. She won from the chaplaincy last week. That is going to be a fun discussion. Looking forward to having her on as ever. And if you're on the YouTube side, make sure you subscribe to the In the Money Media YouTube channel and check out some of our other videos.